So with day one of this regionals over in Europe over and done with, it's just really exciting to be able to see all the different deck lists that they had going on. They didn't just play like, you know, Draven versus Kaisa, or Draven versus Ahri or things like that, but instead actually had a very wide range of decks that ended up showing up. So what does that necessarily mean for this meta? What decks actually ended up showing up day one? And what can we expect to see day two? All of that and more starting right now. So this is something that I absolutely love. It's been a lot of fun to be able to see what's going on with this meta, and this is a real test to see what the English meta is going to be looking out as. Now, this is something that's very interesting to see, too, because one thing that happened is, well, we just had the game come out for Sett 2 a week ago. And so it doesn't give people a whole lot of time to be able to really prepare to get all the cards that they need, even maybe some of the playtesting that they needed here, which can be a little bit difficult to try to put together. Now, I will say before we deep dive into the deck lists and gameplay footage, one thing that I do want to point out is there was a really interesting play at a Renata game that ended up happening, if I remember right, around round 5. Now, the big thing here is, well, actually, let me just show you.
I imagine so.
How is the time warp situation here? Also, right, we're
gonna find out.
Yeah, we're just exhausting everything right now. We take out 4 mind runes. We're not using our gold tokens. Okay. Well, the question is, actually, if you get 3 turns, do you steal away a turn from your opponent with time warp? That would be hilarious as well.
I'm not going to answer that question because I thought I knew the answer to it. And I might be wrong if I thought I knew the answer. Yeah, I think the table spotter is coming in and saying you don't get another turn.
Oh my goodness.
He's asking if we can rewind. Yeah. Because Magad, I believe, had a line.
Can you really rewind when the game has ended? Can you rewind the game? And I think that's very subjective to the judges. This is the first regional qualifier that we're having here in Bologna. So
I'm assuming that the judge team will be the ones that have the final say on that. But I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Also, I will have to rewind my statement about the gold token being not exhausted anymore because you got that one from the Camp Baroness. Yeah.
Although at this point I don't know that really matters too much.
And that's a block.
Revealing a lot of... Okay, so there is the Hidden Blade, and that is the line that you're talking about. Yeah, okay, yeah. Raven Blue moves to the battlefield. Whew, okay.
Farmer's Lair, and we're getting another point, so we're going up to 5.
Passes a 10.
And this is one of those times where I even feel like as the Ahri player, the judge didn't necessarily do anything wrong. The player didn't do anything wrong by asking, hey, can I do a rewind up to this point? There's nothing wrong with that. But what I really think should have happened here was having the ability to say, hey, can I get a head judge ruling on this point? This is one of those times where you would be requesting for a head judge to give a additional ruling or advice on what ended up occurring, because the fact that you're able to say, hey, by the way, I play this time warp, oh, I don't get that turn, can I just bring it back then? You know, I think I have another way to win. And it's like, really, honestly, personally, I would have wanted to see the head judge be called and them to say, hey, sorry, the game is over. It ends in a tie in this case, because it is just a misplay necessarily. And it's, one that, when you're on turn 3, that's it. You don't necessarily get an additional turn. If he would have done that on turn 2, then that would have been perfectly fine. But that's the discrepancy here. And so even as like the Ahri player in question here, I would have asked for a head judge ruling in this case, because unfortunately also that rewind ended up going so far back that they were able to play completely different cards to then be able to win the game. That's the sad part. And so again, I want to be very careful about that, but don't ever be afraid on calling a head judge. That's going to be the biggest thing that I want to bring up to you guys. So anyway, what are these deck lists looking like then? I mean, I gotta say, I really love the diversity of this, and I gotta really commend the broadcast team here at this regionals, because they've done an absolutely insane job at just showing all these different kinds of decks in the game, and that's something that I absolutely love that Riftbound brings to it. One thing that is really special here, too, is that Riftbound does a really good job at creating all the different deck techs because of the legends that we actually have here out in the game. And so one thing that I love that includes is that we have the ability to see so many different types of decks in this gameplay. And you know, that's something kind of unique. You normally have your mechanics and stuff like that that mesh up well and things like that. But you don't necessarily have, like, too many games where it's like, you know, I mean, One Piece somewhat, you know, but, like, where you have those main themes that really help diversify the meta and the deck lists here. I mean, the fact that we also have the metal cards that are sought after here to be able to get the best of a metal card. That is a very prestigious thing to be able to hold, and especially since they announced that after, you know, a couple more tournaments, that the Origins is going to be removed, and Proving Grounds are going to be removed from the ability of winning said metal cards. I don't necessarily agree with that decision, but for now, it's just really cool to see all the diversity out there because of this. And so when we take a look, one thing that I really love to see is what, first off, Draven. I really would have thought that Draven would have been a much more represented, at least in the 20%. Having it down to the 15%, while yes, this is still a very powerful deck, to see it down at this level is so good to be able to see, and I just really like to know what's going on here with all of that. And maybe Draven might be starting to get figured out, but again, we'll see what that actually looks like in the top 64, because where in China they ended up having a huge part of the field near 30 to 35% in those regionals, and then now we are able to see here in the English it's down to about 15%. So will we then see a huge wave of Draven in day 2, like what we saw at 50 to 60% in China? Time will tell. We'll find out here soon enough. But I mean, still, also really love that Kaisa is the second most popular deck at 11%, followed by Aurelia, Ezreal, Annie, Ahri. Ahri was a very surprising one. I didn't necessarily expect that in this case. Now, it did have one really good showing in the in China, where it got pretty high place, all things considered, but at the same time, it just hasn't necessarily had that impact. But it could be maybe that little hidden deck tech that is able to take this deck to the top again. It's never necessarily had that great of a showing, but maybe in set 2, this is going to be the chance for Ahri to shine. Not only that, really, again, a huge proponent here of Sivir. Love to see Viktor. Rexsai is way higher than I thought. Azir, again, going to be pretty high at 48. And then otherwise, even on the second half of this list, we even have 34 Lux decks. I mean, something to consider with that. Yes, Lux, I feel like, has taken a step up in this set, but it still has a little bit of ways to go in the face of what power the rest of the decks have in this meta. And Lux just really seems to fall to miracle decks in this case. Now, at the same time, we still even have, like, Master Yi, which has taken probably the biggest fall out of all of these decks, which is really surprising here, and something that I didn't necessarily expect to be able to see his fall so fast. Whereas, you know, even in first the set 1, he was able to get in and really prove that he had what it takes to be able to make it this far here. One of the biggest things that I got to say about this too is Teemo has never necessarily had his time to shine either. And while we did get a little bit of a Teemo gameplay, I just don't necessarily think that he's going to be there, that there still is other decks that are going to be more powerful and be able to, you know, use the hidden cards better. I mean, we look at Draven, which is a very hidden, crazy deck, and it's able to, you know, do or bring a lot to the table, whereas Teemo, while having a lot of very powerful, you know, hidden cards, just isn't quite there. Now, one thing that actually is surprising me, and we're going to be taking a look at that deck list too, is going to be Rumble. There are 25 decks at 2% of the field that brought Rumble, but in round 7, Rumble had only lost 1 game. And then it ended up going against Viktor in that round 7, and it won. Which means that you are able to make it into day 2 at that point. You needed to get 18 points, which is over 6 wins to be able to do so. and was able to do so. So really cool to be able to see that. That's one that a lot of people thought Rumble was really taking that backseat. Doesn't necessarily look like that it might. It might be a little bit more powerful than what we suspected here. So really cool to be able to see that. Now, likewise, on the next one, after the 6 rounds here, you get to see kind of the diversity that we see. Now, first off, we have a Sivir that was able to get in top 10 at 6-0. At the same time, though, very Draven heavy. And another Sivir even in 6th place. Again, I think Sivir might be a little bit of a sleeper. We talked about that in my last video. Very good deck that is able to harness the miracle ability of purple incredibly well. And then you compound that with the powerhouse that is orange, and you are able to take it to your opponent. But again, I am a little bit worried about how many Draven we have at 6-0, and I'm curious to see what we have in day number 2. Likewise, though, the first one that we ended up actually really watching over was, in this case, Annie here. Now, I really do like this Annie deck list. Again, it seems like Annie has taken a little bit of a falling to the wayside a little bit, and I don't necessarily see why. I know that Annie has a little bit to be desired now with the amount of card draw that she has. But yet, at the same time, I feel like that she still has a lot of power to offer, especially with her legend ability being able to ready up 2 runes at the end of every single turn. That ability alone is something to really change the gameplay here, whereas Draven, more often than not, is going to be having 1, maybe 2 runes up if you're lucky, and you're relying on your hidden cards here. So maybe in this case, Annie can have a little bit better of a showing. But again, one thing that I really do also love is to see invert timelines here. I think having a 1 of in this deck, again, Annie struggling with the card draw, but more importantly, it's a great way to be able to slow down your opponent, where when you are going against the miracle builds, when you are going against Draven, and they have those 7 cards in hand, you are then able to slow them down and stop them in their tracks and say, hey, by the way, that hand, it's now back to 4. So I really like what that is able to do here, and I'm curious to see what else is going to be happening with this deck, because I feel like there's definitely a lot there. Now, of course, in this gameplay, this is going to be a very difficult match here with going against Draven in this case. And the big reason why I say that is mainly due to the fact that we see that Draven, especially when he wins the die roll, it can already seem like you're starting on the back foot. And that can be something a little bit difficult to try to continue to work through in this case. And so you got to be careful about what you can do as the Annie player here. But even still, I still really like the aggression that is able to be done here. Now, I do feel like, yes, it does suck that the cleave ended up having to be used here for the +1. That I don't like that, because especially when you're trying to take over battlefields here, you want to be able to continually be bombarding your opponent with answers here. And unfortunately, that's just not something that we are quite able to do. But still, again, I took Annie to a couple of my locals so far at the Nexus Night. It's been able to do really well, and I've been impressed with what it's able to bring to the table here. Now, even likewise, sometimes one of the hardest things that you're going to be having, though, is answering to purple. Annie, if you have a lot of your units that are being taken out here in this case, you can find yourself being falling further and further behind, whereas, you know, Draven in this case has a lot bigger units that he's able to play, and then he's able to get just a whole lot done with his cards that he's hidden. He's making gold here. He's able to draw cards just for winning combats, and I still feel like he still has that leg up. Now, when Annie does end up going first, Annie can really hit the ground running so much better than Draven, just especially with those 2 runes. But I that's the one complaint I have about this deck, is that I feel like it relies way too much on the card draw. That's something that I don't necessarily love here in this case. Still, at the same time, I really think that Annie still has a lot to explore. We still need to find that fine tune here between power and card draw to make sure that that can coincide together to really take it to the meta. Now, next, one deck that I was absolutely loving here was Rexsai. Now, we're not going to be looking at gameplay for every single deck list. I just want to, because, I mean, they did bring us, like 13, 14 deck lists, and so we are going to be going through a lot of these really quick. But one of the biggest things is that the Phoenix has been one of the highest skyrocketing cards here, where originally at between $8 to $10 has now skyrocketed to about $35 on TCG Player. That's a big deal right there. And luckily, Rexsai is a really fun deck to be able to pilot, and it feels like it's almost there, but just isn't quite, again, finding that mark. I want to be able to see Rexsai be able to really make its run here. And, I mean, the cool part was, in this match, it was able to go against a Draven in this case, and really have a solid match. One thing that I really do like in this deck list too, I really like that they have Sun Disc in the deck. I mean, I feel like that's going to be a big difference maker here, where you are able to accelerate your units out, where it might have been falling a little bit short there previously, but even still, it makes its impact without necessarily being able to continue to hold down the board. And unfortunately, it just, it wasn't quite able to make that impact. And so, again, I'm going to be curious to see if maybe after another set or two that it is going to be able to have its big run. If we are even able to see something in the top 64, that would be really cool to see, but time will tell. Likewise, Ezreal, one of the most popular deck lists, and we've talked about Ezreal in previous videos here, and again, he's one that definitely utilizes the Miracle build here, and what I mean by that is that you're running 3 Ezreal. In Ezreal, though, you don't necessarily need to because you have the guarantee of Ezreal, but if you are only running 1 and that gets destroyed, which is pretty easy to do in this meta, then you are going to be falling behind a little bit. Now, the big thing here in this case is going to be that you have your called shots, you have, your stack decks, your Seal of Discords, and the biggest thing is that you're trying to get to that discarded 10 so that you are able to then get out and make things moving here. Now, one of the biggest things is that this is an Ezreal deck that is doing incredibly good at minimizing the amount of might that you end up having, and then killing your units with spells, and then being able to move in and continually be able to hold down the fort. Now, it did end up going against a Azir in this case, and that was a really cool match to be able to see. And one of the biggest things that I loved about this deck is that Azir was able to get a pretty aggressive start in this format, but then Ezreal was able to work in and really start to make an impact mid to late game. And that's one thing that I think you really got to be watching out for here in this case when you are going against Ezreal, is that the longer the game goes, it feels like the more that you are giving your opponent the ability to get ahead. And that can be something that's a little bit difficult to try to work through. Also, one thing to note, it's really interesting that they have the heart rate monitors. I don't necessarily know how I feel about that. There was one guy that was on like a rested heart rate of 133. Maybe a little bit too much caffeine there, but again, I get why it's sometimes fun to see, how intense or when they maybe do start to feel the pressure, but still though. And again, once Ezreal really starts to get things moving here, he has gold he can create, he has seals that he's able to utilize, and then even after all of that, he can continue to bombard his opponent. This game started where it was 0-3, 0-4, and then he's able to come back and actually win this game. And so the card draw that Miracle is able to give you is something that is absolutely insane and something that needs to be watched out for. And a lot of people are even calling for a max hand size at this point. I don't necessarily feel like that's going to be something that is needed at this point, but still, it is definitely something to keep in mind here. Likewise, on the flip side, we do have a couple other deck lists to be going over. One thing that was really interesting too was we even had a Misfortune Aurora deck that ended up actually coming in and doing relatively well. Now, of course, again, a lot of this was a bunch of side decks that they had going on, but still, a lot of people were asking, hey, is Aurora going to be in this meta? Is there a place for it, even with all this gear destruction? And yes, I feel like that it still is there, but again, orange is very prevalent. Sivir is a very powerful combo deck here too, and because of that, I've gone against a bunch of Aurora decks as a Sivir player, and it's just been very easy to use a Sabotage, be able to even recycle that with a Fizz, and then be able to continue to make sure that your opponent doesn't have the Dazzling Aurora. Even if they do have the Dazzling Aurora, I still have ways to be able to capture that Dazzling Aurora with things like Akshan, which can be very difficult for Aurora players to be able to come back from that. So again, huge risk and reward here on trying to get things going. This is a very interesting list, mainly due to the fact that you look at how many units there are. Now, likewise, you are going to be getting a lot of card draw. There's ways to get things back, but I think this one's mainly just going to be focusing on getting as many cards out of your opponent's hands as possible, get as many Auroras out that you can, and then continue to recycle through your Mind Splitters to make sure your opponent can't do anything. So, really fun deck. Then one that I really liked too here was the Lee Sin. It ended up going against an Aurelia and winning. So that's something that I didn't necessarily have on my bingo card for regionals, but still, it's really fun to see that even something like Lee Sin, something that was definitely thought to be out of this meta, was actually in round 4 and then still taking a game here. Absolutely love what that is able to do. And you look at this deck, and it is really solid, all things considered. But even still, you know, you don't see anything like what you saw with what we saw at the Houston Regionals with Lee Sin, where you were running a lot bigger units for the mid to late game control here. But still, the fact that you have ways to protect your stuff, buff your stuff, then not only that, Challenge is going to be one of the most powerful cards in orange to be able to counter the Dravens, the purples, the being able to fight or flights. It's like, sorry, you can't fight or flight me in a contest here because I'm going to be avoiding combat altogether with Challenge and then moving in for the capture here. So again, I really like what Lee Sin is able to do, and I think that, you know, he's definitely not one that should be slept on and can still make a really big impact on this meta, especially if you're maybe looking for a budget build. This might be the way to do it. Likewise, Sett. Ooh, I mean, I love Sett. I love what he's able to do. We had Sett versus Kaisa in round 5, and it was a really thrilling match to be able to see here. And I gotta say, one thing that I really like about what the Sett was bringing to the table here was that it can be very difficult when going against Kaisas. Kaisas right now are a lot lower to the ground now, where they play a lot smaller units trying to get things moving and then relying on their distribution of might and spell removal to be able to take out the opponent. Well, when you can continue to save your units time after time after time, it can be something very difficult to have to deal with. Not only that, having the Ruin Runner in the game is just such a fun attribute to be able to use, or asset for you to be able to use, because it just can't be targeted by spells or abilities. And then even on top of that, if you buff that, it is going nowhere. It is going to stay on the board the entire time. And I think this kind of dynamic is so powerful. You add equipment like Bone Shiver, Doran's Blade. If you spend a buff to do Call to Glory to add 3, stuff like that is just so incredibly powerful to make sure that you make contesting battlefields as painful as possible. And then when you have the Ruin Runner out, it is just a game changer there. Not only that, Showstopper can be a big surprise on making sure that you can move right back into the battlefield. Hey, you have a Draven out, they fight or flight, you're set back. Oh man, it really feels like you just spent that buff for nothing. Oh, by the way, here's Showstopper. He moves right back in and attacks at the battlefield. Love what that is able to do. And I think Sett, I mean, we talked about this previously. I think Sett might be one of those sleeper decks. We saw in the regionals last regionals, that he was able to get 12th and 16th place respectively, and that was with only like 5 decks being brought to said regionals. And even here, he had even less decks that were brought in this point and was still able to have a really good showing. So are we going to see some sets in top 128, top 64, heck, even top 16? I think we have that chance to be able to do so, because it can have so many different dynamics to be able to take the game to your opponent. Again, one of the hardest things, though, is going to be the card draw that Sett seems to fall a little bit behind on. But even still, I really like what this deck is able to do. You have battlefields that now better help encourage your card draw. You're able to bring a couple of new powerful stuff. I love the dragon here, that when it is spawned in, it adds 4 buffs, or up to 4 buffs to your units. That's a huge difference maker right there. Immediately just saying, hey, all of these guys are insured, so if you try to kill one, I can pick or choose if they choose to survive. That's already a huge dynamic there to make a difference. Then likewise on the Kaisa side, there was a couple of different Kaisa decks. We have Kaisa that went against Jinx, which we'll be talking about that deck list here soon. And then on the flip side, we have the Sett versus Kaisa, which you just saw. Now, one thing that I did really like about this matchup here was that it was able to do just a lot of really cool plays here, all in all. Now, it did end up losing to the Sett player. That was the big thing here. But even still, it has the 2 time warps. It has one of the Fairest Forerunners, 3,000 tails, 2 Progress Day. And again, this is really where Kaisa seems to be heading towards, where it is utilizing as much card draw as possible to get all the answers I need so that I can then just have explosive turns time after time. You can see also on the rune count that this is a very Fury-driven deck. You're going to be sacrificing a lot, even with the Kaisa spell legend ability, to be able to mitigate the power cost by 1 for the first spell that you play. Even still, though, Piercing Light repeated, that's 2. Falling Star, that's 2, and things like that. So it can be very easy for you to lose a lot of power, and you got to be able to balance that out. And so that can make this deck very tricky to try to pilot. And we also are seeing Get Excited back in this game, something that I absolutely love to be able to see. Then Renata, this is the deck in question that had the misplay here with the Time Warp at the end. Again, definitely call a head judge on that. But even still, I had someone in my comments that asked for a good Renata deck, and this looks like it might be one that's actually in the right direction here. I like what it's able to do. It was able to win against the Ahri in this case. Now, keep in mind, this was in round 5. And so being able to go against, multiple different kinds of deck lists and then be able to take it to your opponent in such an explosive way is so cool to be able to see. And I don't want to count this Renata deck out. I feel like she is just barely missing a couple of plays here to really make her that top deck option. But at the same time, Call of the Weeks, the direct kill spells that it's able to utilize here is something that is so powerful here in these matchups. And so I feel like Renata might need a little bit more finessing, a little bit more of knowledge on what needs to be done here. But again, when you're holding and you're able to create gold, that can already make a big difference on getting you to ramp up to that mid to late game. And then as soon as you get over those 5 points, being able to have an additional rune count for your gold is just a game changer there, and something that I really like to see here. And Ahri, again, I love seeing that Ahri is a 3-1. I don't want to count Ahri out by any means, and I feel like that she has so much to offer here. And the fact that so many people ended up bringing it to a regionals is very telling here. And I want to say that mainly due to the fact that Ahri, again, just never had its time in the sun. But at the same time, if we're able to then see what is going on with this meta, what we're able to do here with a very powerful deck, it could be that answer. And I mean, with the Ahri deck list here, I am a big fan of what it's able to bring. Now, it isn't running Time Warps. That was something that we saw in a lot of Ahri decks back in Set 1. But the big thing, too, is it's utilizing Blitzcrank. It's utilizing Sona. That's something that I think is really interesting here. That Ahri is using Sona especially. I mean, the fact that she pays for herself, you play her right out to a battlefield, and she'll immediately ready up 4 runes so that you're able to protect your units. Then on top of that, we also have some really cool stuff like Desert Call, which is basically a flash for, not Desert Call, Emperor's Divide, which is basically the flash of green. You're able to bring back however many units you want to base, and then you're able to continually bombard here. And especially with Kaisa taking a back burner here, and not necessarily being as prevalent, though it is in this regionals, Ahri has a little bit better of a chance of surviving. If you go against Draven, they might be running the, Falling Stars or, the Piercing Lights, whatever else they might be running. But, it's maybe 2 cards of the whole deck. Otherwise, they want to utilize on building up their board and sending you back to base to be able to win combats. And so Ahri now, as the blue Ahri, with only 3 might, has a much better chance of being able to survive. Not only that, but with things like Not So Fast, that can be a pretty big difference maker here too, though this Ahri deck isn't running it, which is kind of surprising, not gonna lie. But I still gotta say, I really like what this was able to do, and I really feel like that deck list should have ended in a tie. Now, next, of course, is Jinx. Now, Jinx ended up actually going against a Kaisa, and when I saw this, I immediately thought, well, why are we just not playing, Miracle Draven or even Annie with this same deck build here? And as I continued to watch the gameplay, it's like, yes, there were very few times where Jinx's legend ability actually came into apply, where you do get to draw an extra card here, but there were still a lot of times that you were able to, still use it, and when you did need to, it was just that little extra power to make that big difference. And so, again, maybe that one little card can be that helpful here. Now, even still, with this Jinx, I gotta say, being 4-0-1, it had a tie. That's crazy here. And especially in last set, Jinx got usually throttled by Kaisa, just with all the spell slinging and things like that. But now that you're able to do a little bit more of a miracle build here, this is definitely something to be watching a lot more with. And I gotta say, I am a really big fan here to see what's going to be happening and what we can continue to see going on with Jinx, and if maybe she does have a little bit more of a place in this meta. Because with cards like Switcheroo, with cards like Ezreal, or even Overzealous Fan, Called Shot, and things like that, you're able to make a very powerful deck list. Though, at the same time, this is essentially Miracle Draven. So pick and choose your battles there on that. If you do really want to build a Miracle deck, I would just rather go with Miracle Draven. But still, when you are going to a regionals and trying to get a metal card, it can be a big difference maker. Next, of course, we also have another version of Kaisa. Not too big of a difference here. Again, pause. We're not going to spend too much time on that. Next, of course, is the Rumble. Oh, man, I absolutely love what this card was able to do. Again, we had a lot of really fun dynamics that were able to be added here. And Rumble, I mean, it was able to go 5-1. It was in round number 7 and able to clinch that top spot, or that day 2 there. So really good job there for being able to make it to that day 2. And again, I really like what Rumble was able to do here more than anything. Again, just it can be such a tough matchup sometimes here. But if you're able to go 5-1, that's very telling. I want to see all the different matchups that Rumble was able to do here. And I want to see that, because if it was going against Dravens, if it was going against Aurelias and Kaisas, Ezreals, and things like that, and still being able to take the games to the opponents, where it was able to go 5-1, able to win against Kaisa right here and stuff like that, then what else is there possibly out there for us to explore here? And maybe, are we a little bit too cruel to Rumble, and does he maybe deserve a little bit higher of a spot here on the meta? Now, next, of course, we get to see a little bit of what the Viktor was able to do here. Again, though, the Viktor was able to get some things moving, though it just wasn't quite able to have the same impact. Now, Viktor did get a big buff here with a couple more good equipment to be able to add. Not only that, but having some great kill spells that can take it to your opponent. But you got to try to play around that sometimes. And even here, where it's like, you know, you have a couple of battlefields that are built up here. You're able to get a good state here. You're almost clutching out the game. And Rumble is going to be able to take it here. And that's going to be the hard part, is you're also sometimes really relying on what your opponent has or doesn't have. If you play out your Imperial Decree and it gets hard bargained, that's it. It just kind of really slows you down there in that case. And so you got to be a little bit careful about what ends up happening and how you go about dealing with said threats here. And even in this case, it's like, unfortunately, if Viktor would have had, a Hidden Blade in hand, it would have been a win at that point. But unfortunately, that just wasn't going to be the case. And, the battlefield is going to get cleared out by the 1,000-tail Watcher. And so, again, that's just so hard to have to watch. But that's how it is, sometimes. And great job to the Viktor player, too. Being able to go 5-1. Again, very, very curious about the rest of this meta, because it feels like we are so close to having we already have an extremely diverse meta. But it feels like, there's just a little bit of, the decks being on top that are on top. That purple is just so powerful. While Viktor does counter a lot of it, they still have a lot of answers to stop Viktor from countering those options here. And so we'll see. But I mean, with all the gameplay that I've already been able to see and watch in this meta, I am very impressed with how this game is feeling and looking. Again, though, still a little bit worried about what we might see come day 2 and what might be making these appearances. Likewise, though, we do have some Aurelia. Now, it was an Aurelia versus Draven match, which I absolutely love to watch here. And I think Aurelia has sometimes some of the best chances of going against Draven, because you can immediately counter the fight or flight. Yes, you are going to be giving him a card, but then you can move right back in and be able to take a battlefield at that point. And Aurelia also has a really good chance of being able to go 2-0 on conquering battlefields turn after turn after turn. You got to be a little bit careful about the difference of gameplay here, because you can easily have too much power spent to where you shoot yourself in the foot and you can't keep up with your opponent here. But still, I gotta say, really big fan of what this deck is able to do. And I mean, an Aurelia being 7-0, the reps that you're able to get, the gameplay that you're able to display here, and you see also the Yasuo in hand. Yasuo can sneak in and get so much points for you. If you play it right, you can go from 4 to 8 points in a turn if they leave a battlefield open, because you're able to, score a couple of points either with like a Yasuo or a Draven or things like that. Now, of course, that does include utilizing Seven Songer, which is definitely not included in this deck list. But even without that, Yasuo being able to move back and forth so easily to be able to get even that extra point can be something to really set back your opponent. So I gotta say, really like what this deck is going to do, and I feel like we're starting to find that balance of what Aurelia needs and getting out kind of that extra fluff. I still don't necessarily know if Stellacorn should be out a 1 or a 2. I get why you would be wanting to run it as a 1. It does really help on trying to get a better deck list going for you, but still, even then, that's going to be something so difficult on trying to get things moving here. But still, I gotta say, I'm very impressed. Likewise, guys, that is going to be it for now. Thank you so much. Again, I am so excited to see what day 2 is going to bring. And it's gonna be absolutely thrilling. One of the biggest things, again, is I'm gonna be curious on to see what decks end up making it and what percentage is owned by Draven. That's gonna be my biggest worry and also very telling there. So we'll see. But again, I am very excited to see what ends up going on here and what we have in store for day number 2. Who's going to be winning the regionals here? Is Aurelia finally going to be winning day 1? Or day 2? Is Draven just going to end up taking it all again? Or maybe is a new champion going to be crowned? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, guys, have a good one.